Hi guys, welcome back to the channel. So over the years I have gotten a lot of questions about fit. I can't answer everyone's questions, but what I can do is give you an overall view of what I do. So in today's video I'm going to talk to you about the step-by-step process I take to get the perfect fit, as I did with this top. So one of the reasons that I have avoided talking about fit until now is that it's really difficult to give general advice that is going to fit everyone, so to speak, no pun intended. So what I'm going to do is break down each step, and it's going to be talking, but it'll be talking in very general terms, so you will need to do some research on your own. I can't answer specific fit questions in the comments, but I do welcome your feedback and share your concerns, the things that have troubled you. Other people might have an answer for you. So the first step in this process is the most important, and that is to take your measurements. You're going to need a tape measure. Where you're going to need to take your measurements will vary wildly depending on the pattern that you're using. So the general measurements that I tend to take before I even start any kind of pattern is my bust, my upper bust, my waist and my hips. If it's a top or a dress. If it's trousers, then I will need to measure my rise. So from underneath up to my back waist and underneath up to my front waist. Also sitting down to take your measurements, as you can see on screen now. I do have a video that goes into a lot of detail about how to take your measurements, so I really recommend that you watch that after this one. It will be linked down below and in the end card. So once you've got your measurements, you want to note them down, but don't rely on them for the next 6 to 12 months. It's really important at the start of every project you take your measurements, because us women in particular, we do vary in our measurements. So now you've got your measurements, the next step is to choose your size. So this is a cashmerette pattern. On the back, she has the body measurements and the finished garment measurements. There's lots of reasons why this is important, but for me, when I'm doing the process, I will look at the body measurements to choose my size. You want to choose the measurements that are closest to the measurements you just took. So for the bust, you're going to want to choose your measurement based on your upper bust. Then look at the full bust measurement to decide whether you need a full bust adjustment. And that's a whole other video that we can get into later. We're going to assume that you don't need a full bust adjustment. For me, my full bust is a 48, my waist is a 46, and my hips are 54. On this cashmerette pattern, I will have to choose my cup size, and there will be instructions in the pattern to help you choose your bust size. Your bust size is not the same as your bra size. That's got to be very clear. It tends to be 1 inch difference between the full bust and the upper bust determines each cup size in patterns. So if there's 1 inch difference, you'll be an A, 2 inch difference, you'll be a B, etc. So once you know that, you can then choose your cup size, go along and find your bust measurement, which is a 48. So that would have me in the size 20. But if you go to my waist is a 46, which would mean I need a size 26, and my hips are 56, also a size 26. So looking at that, I would need a size 20 in the bust and a 26 in the hips and the waist. The pattern will give you body measurements and ease. You choose on your body measurements, but you take the ease into consideration, because there might be positive ease or negative ease. Positive ease is basically where there's extra inches in the pattern for movement. For example, this top has loads and loads of positive ease. But in a stretch top, you might have negative ease, which means the pattern pieces are smaller than your actual body, so they stretch around your body. Depending on the look that you're going for, this may really help you. On paper, I was a size 24 bust and 26 hips for this pattern, but actually, as you saw in that video, I had to do lots of 12s and ended up with a straight size 18 because there was so much ease, it was ridiculous. And as you've just seen, all of this Now you've got your measurements and you've chosen your pattern size. It is time to get your pattern out and measure the pattern pieces. You're going to want to do this with all of your pattern pieces, especially this area here, your shoulders and your arm side to the centre front. That's going to be really important, and also your sleeve if you have trouble with your sleeves. Basically any areas that you have troubles with. So this is a sleeve pattern piece. Let's imagine that this is a knit garment where the ease is going to be negative. I know my arm girth is 18 inches. So what I want to do is look for the size on my pattern piece, take my tape measure and measure under the arm across. If my arms are an 18 and it's an 18 on here, that's really good because that means I've got some negative ease and some seam allowance. But when you measure your pattern pieces, always take into account the actual seam allowance. On this pattern piece here, you can see this is a bodice, and there's the dart on the side there, there's the centre front. I will often measure from there through to the side seam, just under the arm, to see just how big or little it's going to be on me. Likewise, I always measure the shoulder seam. So now you've measured your pattern pieces, you can relate that to the actual measurements from your body, and you may spot some adaptations that you need to make even before you make your first test garment. So what you'll do is you'll trace your pattern off and make those adaptations. That's all there is for this step. Really simple, as long as you know what you're doing with adaptations. That's not something I can go into in this video, but it is, I've got lots of videos on the various adaptations I make. If you look in my playlist where I've got all my makes, link it down below, you will see, if you watch through those makes, you'll see the adaptations that I do make, and I tend to show how I make them. So the next step in your process is to make a muslin, a practice garment, a toile as I like to call it. Basically this is a garment where you don't do any of the finishes, you just do the basic sewing to assess the fit. So you've seen in any of my videos where I do toiles, I just use any old scraps of fabric. If I'm sewing the top, I will do the shoulder seams, put the arms in and the side seams, and that tends to be enough to be able to assess the fit. But if you don't have scrap fabric and you only have good fabric, then I would make a practice run where you do finish the whole thing and you can still assess it and then make another one. For me personally, that's too much work, so I just do the first route where I sew what I absolutely have to in order to assess the fit. So the next step is you've made your toile, you've tried it on and you're able to assess. You'll want to look at yourself wearing the toile in the mirror. We'll talk about tops because I think that's what most of you will be making. I've got my toile on. I will assess the shoulder first of all. Pattern companies, for the love of me, I do not understand why they have to give plus size people really big shoulders. We might have fat pockets, quite a lot of places, but our shoulders don't grow, do they? So what I find is when I try a garment on, a pattern on, is that the shoulder falls too low. If it's a scrap piece of fabric, I'll take a marker pen and I will just mark where I want the seam to be, and also mark under there, because if your top seam comes low, then your arm side will be too far out. Especially if you want it in significantly, mark it there and mark it all the way round. And then I would also assess whether the front meets. If you've got gaping or you've got lines going this way, you may actually want to go up a size. You might want to go down a size if it's too big for you. There's all sorts of things, and it really depends on the pattern. So I can't go into any more detail than that in this video. If you're happy with it, you can get on and start to make the pattern. But if you're not happy with it, make those changes, alter the pattern piece and make a second toile. And go through that process again and do as many toiles as you need to do. When I made this top, I ended up with 4 toiles over 2 tops. I did have the blue top as well. But once you've really perfected one pattern, you can go back to that pattern time and time again and make alterations to turn it into a different top. So all those steps so far are what I do in my own personal journey to get a good fit. But something else I do is I'm now sewing up the garment in my favourite fabric, this one, and I will try it on as I go. For example, you saw it in the video about this top where I just draped it over my shoulders before I put the sleeve in to see if the shoulders sit in the right place, because that can be really helpful, because you can make last minute changes to the proper fabric as you're going. And the next thing I do in this process is, as I'm going along throughout the whole process, I am writing notes down, because I will never ever remember it the next time I come to make this pattern. You write each change as you wrote it down, including your measurements and everything. It's going to make the future makes a lot more easier. If you followed these steps, then you should be able to get a perfectly fitting top too, or dress or trousers. It's going to take practice, it's going to take trial and error, but the more you practice it, the more experienced you become, and the more you know what you're doing. So to get you started off, why don't you watch this video where I go into depth about how to take your measurements, what measurements are, and all the rest of it. I hope this video helped. I'll catch you in the next one.